Hello and welcome. My name is John Dexter. A while ago I put up a tutorial video on my ICM camera movements, the sort of movements I use for varying compositions. I thought I'd do this follow-up video, which is going to be showing you roughly the same images, the final images, but I'm also going to be showing you the failures of that particular image, which, trust me, is always a lot. But I'm going to try and explain what went wrong with them, and how you can improve on it. So if you take an image and you look at it, you can hopefully sort of think back and sort of say, yes, he sort of said do this or do that, to correct it. So it might be helpful to you, because ICM is very sort of random, but you have a certain amount of control. You try to have a certain amount of control over what you're doing. So yeah, it might be helpful to you. So we'll get stuck into the first image and I shall see you at the end. Okay, the first image we're going to be covering is this one of sailing boats in Christchurch Quay, and this was the final image that I kept and I quite liked, but I'm now going to show you some of the ones that didn't make it, and basically why they didn't make it. What is wrong with this image? Basically it's the fact there's too much detail. I know this sounds crazy, but with ICM abstract photography, if you don't get the camera movement speed right, you don't get the image that you're after. And the fact that this has got too much detail in it really totally ruined the image, or it did for me. So if you see that in the back of your camera, you know, and you've got too much detail, then you need to move the camera faster, or maybe even not so much faster, but a sort of bigger amounts of movement, larger amounts. So rather than moving it just a little bit from down to up, move it quite a lot from down to up. But yeah, that's what is wrong with this image. This one is the complete opposite to the previous image. We've lost all detail in this one, and the cause of this is either I moved the camera way too fast or too much. The other thing is, with the mask disappearing off the top of the image, that is probably because I moved the camera from up to down rather than from down to up. I have actually sort of covered this in some of my previous videos, but yeah, if you see that, sometimes that actually works for the image, but it depends what you're after. So if you see this sort of image on the back of your camera where you've lost all detail, try slowing down your movement or the amount you move it in. Getting the composition right in the image is a very, very difficult thing to do, and very often it's more luck than sort of skill. This is why you've got to take a lot of shots of a particular composition. In this case, I haven't got enough foreground and I've got too much sky, so I probably started moving the camera as an absolute split second before I hit that shutter button. So you've got to sort of compose your composition, and the split second you hit that shutter button, start moving your camera. If you find you're getting an image like this where there isn't enough foreground and you keep getting this, try moving your camera down so you're getting more foreground before you hit the shutter button, and hopefully you will then get that foreground in. But it's just a case of sort of trying your starting position or your finishing position to see if you're getting the actual image in the right position at the end of it, if you understand what I mean. Yeah, it is one of those very difficult things to do. Sometimes when you hit that shutter button, you don't want to start moving the camera for an absolute split second and then move the camera. That way you get more detail in the image. It depends if that's the sort of look you're after. But again, it's just a case of go out there and try different things, look at them in the back of the camera and think, yeah, I haven't got enough foreground, or I got too much sky, or I haven't got enough sky and I got too much foreground, and alter your movements slightly and see if that improves it, and learn from it. That's the thing, it's all a big learning curve. So, look at your images, decide if that's the sort of look you want. If it's not, try something different and see if that improves it. This was also a Christchurch key, but a completely different look of the same composition, or roughly the same composition. But rather than down from up movement on this one, we were doing a sideways movement. Now, very often sideways movement of the camera is used for the beach or waves. That's the typical sort of composition that you use that type of movement in. But it can also be used in other sort of compositions like this one. But again, I'm going to show you a couple that didn't make it and why. We had the same situation where I was not moving the camera either fast enough or directionally enough. Again, we have too much detail in the image. This is the sort of result you're going to get if you've moved the camera either, again, too fast or too much. It's all a case of look at your image once you've taken it and decide what you've got to do to sort of get the final result that you're after. This image, I'm not particularly sort of blown away by it, but it does give you an example of the sort of effect you can get with camera movement. When I saw this tree in the field, I knew exactly the image I was after, which was this. If you watch my previous video on camera movement, I have sort of explained the camera movement I use for this image, which is basically turning the camera to portrait orientation on the left, and then turn the camera right the way over to portrait orientation on the right, which gives you this effect. But I'm going to show you some of the rubbish that it created as well. This is going to be very difficult for me to actually tell you what I did wrong. It's when you're after a sort of an illusion, if you like I've just shown you, you just have to sort of keep trying. Your starting point, your finishing point, the amount you move the camera in, and see what result it gives you. And this was one that just didn't work, obviously, because I haven't got that sort of pyramid effect that I was after. So yeah, this was obviously one that maybe I moved it not enough to the right or not enough to the left. But again, it's just a case of if you're after that sort of effect, you just need to sort of try different amounts that you move the camera in. Again, we've sort of ended up with the sort of reverse effect of the last image. So, I've got the right hand side right, but I haven't got the left hand side right. In this example, I basically lost all sort of detail in the tree, and this would have been because I was moving the camera way too fast. Now, if you find yourself in a situation where you're having to move the camera fast to sort of get the amount of movement you want within the shutter speed, slow your shutter speed down. I always do it via the aperture using a neutral density filter. That way you can end up, it gives you more time to move the camera so you don't have to move it so fast. But again, you know, if that's the sort of effect you're after, great. But again, look at your image and sort of say to yourself, you know, why did that end up so blurred? Was it because I was moving it way too fast? Now, when taking people, there's two things you have to take into account. One is your camera movement, which in 9 times out of 10 with people it's just a little jiggle. And the other thing is your shutter speed. Unlike the previous images where you are using your shutter speed purely to give you time to move the camera, with people it's critical, because you imagine this girl's walking. If you've got too long a shutter speed, she's just going to be a blur. And if you've got if your shutter speed is too quick, not only is she going to be too sharp in the image, but it's not going to give you time to jiggle the camera a little bit to give this image the look you're after with the sort of soft effect, if you like. So yeah, you've got two things to consider there. This is an example of probably the shutter speed being too slow. So as you can see, the people are too much of a blur, basically. And this is an example of having it too fast. Not only is the person too sort of sharp for my taste in the image, but as you can see, it hasn't given me time to jiggle the camera around, so the street light and the background are not soft enough. Now we come on to extreme camera movement, just sort of throwing the camera around. Again, if you watch my previous video, I'll show you the sort of movement I mean. I can't teach you what's right and what's wrong with this, because there is no right and there is no wrong. It's just a case of sort of throw the camera around and see what sort of image you end up with. If I'm doing this sort of movement, I will probably take 400-500 shots of a composition, and when I get home, look at them on the computer and just sort of see what has worked. I can't show you an image and sort of say, oh, you should have done this or you should have done that. It really is so random. But you can get some really amazing results from it, so it's fun. It's well worth trying, and this is one image that I got from that sort of camera movement, which is very abstract, but it's quite extreme, but I think it really works. But I'll just run through a couple of images and show you what sort of results you get from this type of camera movement. I've got 3 or 4 images that I'll just put up now, just to sort of show you the results you get, and then you've just got to look at them on the computer when you get home and sort of think, yeah, can I do anything with that or not? But I will say, if you take 300, 400, 500 shots with this type of camera movement, if you actually end up with 1, or on a good day 2, you're doing well, because as I say, it is so random. And this gives you an idea of to be honest, the sort of rubbish you get from it as well. Pulling stuff into an image like a sunset or clouds or water is always fun. And this one was actually Knowlton Church, and it had a beautiful sunset that day. And by sort of moving the camera, again in my last video I show you the camera movement I use for this, but by doing so you pull again either the sunset or waves into the image. In this example I'd probably actually concentrated pointing the camera too much at the sunset and not enough at actually the ruins of the church. So I'd got a nice sort of sunset effect, but I hadn't got enough detail within the sort of little church itself. This example is probably quite the opposite. I'd concentrated the camera for too long on the actual church before I moved it to sort of drag in the sunset. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a nice image, and if that's the sort of effect you're after, that's absolutely great. But it wasn't the effect I was after on the day. So yeah, by not moving the camera fast enough over to the sunset and dragging it in, I got this image. Well, thanks very much for watching. I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope when you go out and do a bit of ICM you can sort of think back and sort of think, well, you know, what I've said, and hopefully it'll be helpful for you to sort of correct the sort of failures that you're getting, because trust me, there will be a lot of them. So yeah, as I say, if it has been helpful and if you've enjoyed it, please leave a like below. If you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing to my channel. And for all of those of you who already have, I give you a huge thank you. Hit that notification bell to see any future videos I put up. All the usual links are below to Instagram and my website if you want to have a look at some of my images. That would be absolutely great. So yeah, all that's left to be said is thanks very much for watching. See you again soon. This is John Dexter saying bye for now.